For everyone with an interest in MASH or, more broadly, steatotic liver disease, Surf's Up. Surfing the MASH Tsunami's annual year-end interviews with some of the people who made a difference in the MASLD world in 2023. Season 4, episode 50 plus starts now.
Today on Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
This has been a scientific community that is willing to adapt and eat our humble pie, right? I mean, we started out not knowing anything and we've learned so much and we continue to learn. And it's the kind of place where, you can't use a slide deck from 6 months ago because it's outdated.
This positive predictive outcomes on non-invasive technologies, whether it's MRI, whether or not it's PDFF, whether it's FibroScan, how we can get that into the community. And that's what excites me.
As I listen to the way you describe it, it almost sounds like there's a collective humility that you don't usually see in academic medicine that enables people to step back and say, okay, let's just all look at this together. Whether we got it perfect or not doesn't matter.
Yes, I 100% agree. I think we've learned as a field that we need to break down these barriers that normally hold us back. Pride, our own barriers of pride. I mean, that's important, right? That runs deep. And also the willingness to work together across lines, across industry, academia, across industry, academia, and all the others in between.
As a momentous year in steatotic liver disease comes to an end, the Surfing the MASH Tsunami team is reviewing the year with some of our favorite guests. Today, liver health advocate Louise Campbell and pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green interview Novo Nordisk International Medical Vice President Michelle Long on the value of collaboration and its impact on knowledge creation in 2023 and 2024 on the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast.
So this afternoon, and it is this afternoon except for Louise, where it's this evening, we're here with our good friend Michelle Long, who we knew when she was an academic, a full-time academic, and now we know when she's pursuing her research and her passions at Novo Nordisk. Hey, Michelle, how are you today?
Hi, Roger. Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. You're in Boston today, right?
Yes.
You can tell because although... Are there windows in your room or is it artificially lit?
It's artificially lit, although yesterday in Boston, it was dark and rainy, and I thought for a moment I was in Denmark. I was feeling a kinship with my Danish colleagues, for sure.
You look like you're in the holiday.
Yeah, we had that also.
The Enterprise.
We had brutal flooding here recently. In fact, Louise and I are commiserating about that. Is it flooding up in Boston also?
Yes, it was really crazy. And we were out of power yesterday afternoon as well. So it was really, really wild weather here.
So my next venture business will be ark building. Someone else can collect the animals. I'll just build the arks. It's all right. So this is basically just a wrap up on 2023 and a look ahead at 2024 in casual and I dare say generic terms. We don't want to talk about anything people can't talk about, but just to get a feel. So just start with, if you have a look back over all of 2023 in MASLD land and a word or a phrase or an expression that captures how you feel about the year, what would that be?
I would say momentum. There's been so much movement this year that, first of all, it's hard to reflect on a full year, I think, of MASLD because so much has changed that it's really difficult to kind of remember where the field was this time last year. I mean, it moves that much and that quickly, which is really exciting. We had the nomenclature change announced at EASL, and that was June of 23, and that was only 6 months ago. Yet so much has changed even in the last 6 months. So I would say there's been a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement, and I think we're all also very much looking forward to the next year ahead. So I think this very fast pace will continue, which is also just really exciting and engaging for everyone in the field.
So first of all, you make an interesting point indirectly, which is I can't ask what happened this year in MASLD land because MASLD land hasn't been around for a year. I could say steatotic liver disease, I could say fatty liver disease, but I couldn't say MASLD land because we haven't had it that long. Point number one. Well put. It feels like that was a long time ago. It feels like Vienna was a long time ago. It doesn't feel like Boston was such a long time ago, but Vienna was. I think that's a good point. Number two is I agree with you about the pace amplifying. And the last time it felt like this was 2019, and then we got the double whammy of drugs crashing into pandemic. But I think people are somewhat more optimistic about resmetirom than they were about either of the drugs in 2020. And hopefully no more pandemics.
Yeah, I would say that this has been a scientific community that is willing to adapt and eat our humble pie, right? I mean, we started out not knowing anything, and we've learned so much, and we continue to learn. And it's the kind of place where, you can't use a slide deck from 6 months ago because it's outdated. Certainly a year ago, it's not relevant. And you can see also just from what we're seeing with press releases coming out and such, and those in the industry putting out their proposals and plans for future studies. And you can just see how quickly things are changing and moving, and the system is learning and adapting. That will continue on into the next year. But I think that that's really been a theme. And, we've come so far since 2019. I don't hear people being defensive. I really hear people saying, let's actually talk this through and see what we've learned, and let's do it smarter now, which is just, I think, the right approach. And it's really nice to be among people that are kind of willing to learn and move the field forward together.
I believe I've observed everything that you just described in the conversations we've been having with people. I think that's exactly right. Are there any particular places you can think of where that be areas of inquiry where you or ways of doing things where you think that's been most striking?
To me, it really became clear in the FDA workshop on NITs. That was the fall. That was sometime this past fall. It seems like forever ago. But I mean, I think it was really interesting to kind of hear the presentations and the story behind how we got to where we are today and where we need to go in order to move the field forward. We have learned so much. And it was so well put together in that presentation of, look, this is what we thought. This was the best guess that we had for how we thought we should develop drugs and what would be a reasonably likely surrogate endpoint. But look at what we've learned. It's quite a lot. And I think that I heard from those participating in that workshop that there's a willingness to come together to actually put into action what we've learned and come up with alternative plans. So I do see that as a really good result from that workshop, and something I really look forward to hearing more about and engaging with in the next year.
Yeah, we were talking through that workshop also, or right after, and I think we had similar reaction to it. Where do you see it going?
I think that the time is right to have a scientific consensus around another strategy. I mean, we're starting to see data coming out now linking NITs to outcomes, not just in one study, but now in multiple studies, different NITs, different examples. We'll have more and more trial data coming out, which of course is super helpful and really necessary. So I think we're getting to a point where we actually have data to put behind some of our sort of scientific hypotheses. And I think that this could happen, in the next year or two, where we see across the fields, industry, patient advocates, key opinion leaders, the whole group coming together and with regulators to formulate, new ideas and new plans.
To the degree you can discuss that, is that happening today in tangible ways? If I knew where to look, would I see things happening where you go, okay, I can touch that?
I mean, you're starting to hear the conversation. I mean, you hear it if you wait at the end of, any session on this. There was this beautiful session at EASLD on NITs. This was from the MASLD SIG program. And you stick around after that program and you hear the conversation. So it's out there. I think it's just, can we unite people together? And I think there are venues for that. There's the Liver Forum, I think, makes a lot of sense as a place for this to happen. There were conversations at the Liver Forum the last time we were face-to-face in Paris around doing just this thing. Even that was before this workshop. So yes, I think that it is happening. We'll continue to support it as much as we can. I certainly will personally. I do think that there will be movement in this area, and probably looking at groups that are really good at bringing people together, such as the Liver Forum, is a good place to keep an eye on.
I think I get invigorated by listening to everybody's takes on the year. This whole thing of the speed of momentum changing in that last 6 months with the new term. I started off the year finishing a book chapter, which has now had to have the entire phraseology, and I'm sure you're more used to this than me, phraseology changed, and am I going back to that phraseology? And it was, for me, that was not really nice at EASL when Quentin and everybody got up on the stage and said, we can just literally change the name. But this whole FDA thing that you were discussing, I thought was a really great initiative. The engagement of the FDA with the communities and the patient communities to try and, yes, move beyond the biopsy, but at a time frame that is in keeping with how they want to do it. But you're right. I'm amazed by the amount of, I suppose I knew it was always going to happen, this positive predictive outcomes on non-invasive technologies, whether it's MRI, whether or not it's PDFF, whether it's FibroScan, how we can get that into the community. And that's what excites me. And I think your whole description of how you see that moving on is just like, there is so much happening in the day and age. So how much is going to happen next year, do you think?
I totally agree with you, Louise. And I think that the nomenclature is a nice example, because especially when I was, of course, part of the Delphi process, and then when it was rolled out and announced at EASL, and there was concern, I think, by some in the scientific community, okay, how is this going to work? How is this going to be adopted? And now, I mean, at least internally at Novo Nordisk, it's just like, what? This was called something else before? I mean, we're so used to using now the new nomenclature internally that it's very second nature. And I'm also seeing that at scientific external meetings and talking to others in the field as well. I mean, and that just shows you the willingness, I think, for this community of people to change and to adapt. I mean, I think it's just because we're so used to it, right? I mean, we're so used to developing and thinking in this fast-moving place that this is just another thing we've done with the nomenclature. Makes sense. Let's do it. It's the right thing. And we can move on and move forward. So I think that's been a really nice example. I mean, I will say at the beginning, I was a bit concerned about it, but now I'm looking back and reflecting. I'm like, I probably shouldn't have been. Knowing what we have gone through as a scientific community, knowing what we do every day, there really should never have been any concern, at least by me. I think it's a nice example of what we can do and how quickly we can do it.
Absolutely. But it makes me laugh because I think your Novo Nordisk Australia colleagues will have difficulty the same way as I do. I work between the two areas, and it's like it's still naffled in Australasia and the Asia Pacific, and it's MASLD now in the rest of the world. So I've got to keep remembering. But to a patient, to be fair, they just know it as fatty liver. It's when we get to the diagnosis end of the stage that it's easier to explain it. It's a bit of fat in the liver. So they understand that whole terminology. And then we bring it down to the niches. And we did a session with Fatty Liver Foundation and Sober. And she had the nomenclature picture of the 7 categories with MASLD and all of that behind her on the wall. So it was great art. That's how much it's embedded now into the sort of communities. But and it is great to see it. The only thing I would comment on the Delphi process, there were no nurses on the Delphi process who obviously would align with the patient communities as patient advocates. So I would like to see future Delphi processes bring in the nurse and allied health teams. That's just a little hands up, because we would no doubt we will change the name in the next 20 years.
You think it's going to take 20, huh?
Yeah. We might find, with technology, as Michelle was describing, we will find lots of new ways that the liver is doing things, and we'll have to drill down even further.
So, Michelle, as I listen to the way you describe it, it almost sounds like there's a collective humility that you don't usually see in academic medicine that enables people to step back and say, okay, let's just all look at this together. Whether we got it perfect or not doesn't matter. Let's see if we can get it. Yeah, Quentin's the one who keeps saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Can we get this better? Can we get this better together? How do we all do this?
Yes, I 100% agree. I think we've learned as a field that we need to break down these barriers that normally hold us back. Pride, our own barriers of pride. I mean, that's important, right? That runs deep. And also the willingness to work together across lines, across industry, academia, across industry, academia, and all the others in between, of course, bringing in patients and their voice at all levels. We see this now as not something that's nice to do. Oh, that would be great. We should do it. This is critical. This is the only way forward. And I think we've seen that. I mean, we've tried it other ways, right? And that's what we've been doing. And look where we are. We're still here talking about how this is an unmet need and how there's no approved therapies. So when you've been through what we've been through as a field, I think you really need to re-examine. And I do think that that's what happened in 2023. It was a time to re-examine where we've been. I see it as an inflection point. And I think the nomenclature change is like a nice way to kind of mark it. But I do think that the field really this year, more than any, and maybe it's just because of where I am and my kind of insights in the field, that's possible. But I really do think that that there's a different language that we're hearing, and people are saying, actually, look, this is what happened. This is what we knew. This is what we're learning for it. And this is how I think we should move forward. And it's more conservative. It's more open to suggestions. It's more collaborative. And I think it's really refreshing to see. And I think something that you don't often see, but we've been put in this situation. But I think hopefully this means a lot of good will come from it, and we'll be able to advance much faster in the next 5 years, 10 years than we were in the prior.
Boy, I've got so many unformed questions running around in my head. Start with this one. Other than nomenclature, is there a place you can shine a light on where the listener would say, yeah, I get it. That's exactly what Michelle's talking about?
When we look at some data that emerges and we see, let's say, histology data that emerges in a clinical trial or a phase 2 trial. And when we see histology data, we now know that it's not just, okay, you can read the punchline and you understand fully the story. We understand now the complexities of histology and how it's read. And is it a single pathologist, or, and of course, now most of the time it's consensus, but how was that done? And was there AI, digital path? What's the readout of that? And when did they do the biopsy? Was it too soon? When should we expect changes to happen, especially in people with advanced disease? How do we interpret the histology in light of all the other things that are potentially happening, the non-invasive testing that is done? And now we're seeing that, of course, the outputs where sponsors are including non-invasive testing. So we see that along with the histology. How does that play into how you interpret it? So it's so complex. And I think we're seeing, when you're looking at an output, it's not just what was the output, it's all of these questions become relevant and potentially influence what you do with it and how, you decide to run your trial or how you interpret the results. So I think that's what I'm talking about, that, I think it's a recognition that what might have been simple before is really not. And we need to make sure, we don't jump to a conclusion, either a positive conclusion or a negative conclusion based on simple data alone.
So as I listen to you, here's the example I'm coming up with. Bariatric follow-up study demonstrates it takes 5 years to get to a one-stage regression of fibrosis for most patients. The one year is not enough to catch what's really going on. So then we ask, okay, so how do I interpret resmetirom data? And I'm just using resmetirom because that's the data that's publicly out there that says only 25% succeed, right? Then I think about the presentation Stephen Harrison gave with histoindex data in Boston, where they suggested if you look at it the right way through AI, you get a 34% efficacy rate in placebo and a 54% in the drug. Still a 20% spread, but it's a very different 20%. And then talking to Dean Tai afterwards, and it's also in one of the conversations in this series, he says that histo gets roughly a third efficacy rate every time they run their technology in placebo. So it tells us, first of all, there's a lot more to know if we had better ways of looking at it. And second, it tells us that we don't really know exactly how well or for how many patients resmetirom will quote unquote work. And we need better ways to figure that out, because the economics of failing lots of people on a drug for a year to get to an answer, payers aren't going to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about, what does success look like? And that's hard to define. And we've known for years the importance of fibrosis and changes in fibrosis, and that at least at one point in time, if you have fibrosis and you look at other histologic measures that relate to outcome, it's the fibrosis that is important. Okay, so that's in our base knowledge. But then we have that presentation at EASLD that showed this was a long-term bariatric follow-up cohort, and you had repeat biopsies over time. And we see now data which confirms a suspicion, but now for the first time showing that when you have NASH resolution, that you have improvement in mortality in this patient population. We're hearing now more and more also the importance of NASH resolution. Finally, we have some data to support it in this bariatric surgery cohort. It'll be really great to see the finished population. And of course, we see NASH resolution with resmetirom and a lot of other drugs as well. So it becomes really difficult to define success when you have too short an outlook. And we know for our patients with liver disease, I mean, they're in the long game, and we're in it with them as hepatologists. We want to improve their long-term outcomes, and we want to get there and have long-term outcomes with them. So my husband, he's a cardiologist, and he takes care of patients with valvular heart disease. We talk about clinic, and the average age of his patient population is like 75. Mine is like 50. So it's very different. And I say to him, I would love it if one of my patients has a complication of aortic stenosis, because that's just never going to happen. We never get there. And that's what we're talking about. That's what we need to do. And the needle we need to move for our patients with liver disease is long-term outcomes. It's getting to those long-term outcomes. It's improving life, expectancy. And that's where we're moving towards. And that's really how we have to define success. But it's just so hard to measure that when we're looking at these, short-term outcomes that are, of course, complicated to interpret.
So before we move to wrap-up question, we have another interview in 10 minutes. Not that that's a big deal. Listening to you more than at any other point, it scares me that some drugs got killed in clinic where if we had better ways to look at them, they might not have, right? I mean, we know, for example, seladelpar, if people had taken a more serious look at interstitial hepatitis, that wouldn't have gotten killed because it turns out not to be their unique problem. I think about aldafermin and the one rogue cell that killed that study, where if you had better ways of looking at the data, the drug might still be here. And it appears that it, based on Alpine 4, that it might work in cirrhosis, which is really a big deal. How do you protect, given that it's an industry belief that fast kills are the efficient way to do business, how do you protect against bad fast kills based on models that aren't adequate to the challenge?
Yeah, that's a great question, Roger. It's a huge challenge. I think it's a balance. I mean, of course, you can't have trials go on forever. There needs to be a business case as well. So sometimes the ideal is just not achievable. So I think you need to set appropriate expectations, do the best that you can, and make sure that when you have a result that you have to make a decision on, that you build into it careful consideration of the full picture and really getting at that full picture. I mean, and this is also something that we talk about at the Liver Forum around, making sure that you do, it's not just one assessment, that you have a lot of secondary endpoints. And of course, the regulators are asking us to do this as well, putting in as much NIT information as you can and seeing what we can gain from it. So I think you do need to kind of put all those things together and have your basic tumor board, get all the heads in the room and say, this is how I see it, and come up with a plan to move something forward. But it's really challenging. And then if we had an easy answer to that, then I think we would already have solved the problem.
So that's a great segue. Louise, you have any questions before we segue to 2024?
No, I've loved listening to it, and it's been fascinating.
Myself as well. So, Michelle, if we were sitting here 12 months from now, as we may well be actually, looking back on 2024, what do you expect we will be saying about the year ahead?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a year that will mark a big change in the field. I think that a lot of us think there's going to be an approved therapy in 2024, so that it would be a huge momentum step forward, for the field and for our patients. We'll see emerging data coming out from different mechanisms of action, which I think will also be exciting. And I think we're going to see people moving forward from the nomenclature to continued consensus in the scientific community. So I'm really, really looking forward to 24.
So not to be Debbie Downer, but is there a storm cloud in the sky? It's a bright sky. Is there a storm cloud?
I mean, of course, there's always storm clouds. It's hard. I'm an optimist, so I always see the rainbow when there's a storm cloud, and I'll continue looking for that. And we will deal with the storm cloud as it comes, I guess.
So, Michelle, have you met Louise, by the way?
Yes.
When you talk about people who always see the rainbow when looking at the storm cloud.
What storm cloud? I see the storm cloud and I design my umbrella so that it's not going to affect me. And then you can see the rainbow from underneath your umbrella.
My wife describes her job at home as being the preventing disasters before they strike department, which I guess would be the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yes.
Michelle, it's always fantastic talking with you. Thanks for a great conversation. Not going to see you in Hashtag because we're not going to be there, but maybe you'll be able to help on our coverage. And I look forward to seeing you at other places throughout the year.
Yeah.
And you're right, a lot of interesting stuff ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Happy holidays.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy.
Bye.
And now for the Season 4 End-of-Year Episodes Business Report.
Slava Chrini, Chayim Slava, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. And also Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. The last time I recorded a business section for this podcast, the U.S. Congress was delaying getting badly needed aid to Ukraine. The world was decrying the death of Palestinian civilians, while most were forgetting, and even worse, some were celebrating, the horrible rapes, beheadings, and other beastly crimes Hamas committed on innocent Israelis October 7th that precipitated the Israeli military action. I'd love to say that 3 weeks later, things have changed for the better, and there were days of hope in the Middle East during the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. But sadly, little is meaningfully improved. As we come to this holiday season, let's hope the Ukrainian military maintains and perseveres through the coming winter, and that we can find a solution in the Middle East that preserves an Israel that does not have to fear its neighbors, and allows a Palestinian people who live next to them to find peace and prosperity and pursue a better quality of life for their families and themselves. Slava Ukraini, Am Yisrael Chai.
Congratulations, Yarn, and welcome back.
Last time we met, it was too soon to announce Professor Schottenberg's promotion to department head at the medical school in Saarland. Well, that's official now. Jorn has assumed his new responsibilities, and he will be with us on a more or less regular basis going forward. We may need to work a bit on how to improve his internet speed and reliability when staying overnight in Hamburg. I'm sure we'll work that out.
Hey, Spotify, thanks for the good news.
Last week, we received from Spotify their wrap-up numbers from 2023. What these numbers told us was that we had more growth this year than we had anticipated. 50% more listeners, 11% more streams, 72% of people listening doing so for the first time. And if we extrapolate up from Spotify's share of our entire listener pool, 3,000 listeners who rate us in their top 10 podcasts, 2,000 rating us in their top 5, and 750 rating us their overall top. Those are bigger numbers than we thought we had, and we're excited to know that so many people are gaining benefit from this podcast.
You will see new graphics and a new email address when we all return in 2024.
In the interest of efficiency and recognition of Eric's increasingly demanding schedule, we decided to execute the entire graphic and website cutover to MASH Tsunami. All will be fixed when we come back in the beginning of the new year.
The vault is closed for 2023.
Historically, we've included neither Vault conversations nor business sections during the year-end interview series. No more Vault this year as well, but there are a few business section comments I want to share. These may change during the interview week or not. If they change, we'll let you know. And that's it for the year. I want to thank our team, Jorn, Louise, Jake, Mike, Eric, Steve, for their work throughout the year, and more important, to thank you, the listeners, who stuck with us throughout. We've got more interviews ahead, and after that, we'll be back early in January with a new year of episodes and perhaps some new features as well. Until then, enjoy the holiday. Happy 2024. And as always, stay safe and surf on. Bye-bye now.
Join us tomorrow when our interview partner will be Tatiana Deshko, Director of Programs for the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine.